Hello guys, this is part 46 of SQL Server. In this session, we will learn about instead of update trigger. Before continuing with this session, I strongly recommend to watch part 43, 44 and 45 of this video series. So in SQL Server, there are three types of triggers: DML triggers, DDL and logon. DML triggers are fired automatically in response to DML events. Example of DML events include insert, update and delete. DML triggers can be further classified into two types: after triggers and instead of triggers. After triggers are fired after the triggering action, whereas instead of triggers are fired instead of the triggering action. Now we have spoken about instead of insert triggers in the previous session. In this session, we will learn about instead of update trigger. Let's understand that with an example. We have two tables here: TBL department table and TBL employee table. Now this view is based on these two tables. This is the view. And this view is based on these two tables. So if you look at this view, the ID, name and gender columns are coming from TBL employee table, and the department name column is coming from TBL department table. So obviously this view is based on multiple base tables. In the previous session, we have seen that if a view is based on multiple base tables, and if you try to insert a row into the view, it does not allow you to do that, and it throws an error. Stating the view or function, is not updatable. Because the modification affects multiple base tables. Okay. And we have overcome that by creating an instead of insert trigger. and we have overcome that by creating an instead of insert triggers. Now let's try to update this view. Instead of inserting a row into this view, let's try to update this view in such a way that the update is going to affect multiple tables. So if you look at the update statement, here it is, the update statement. So if you look at the update statement we have here, so we are updating the view and we are changing the name column and the department name column. So obviously name is coming from TBL employee table and department name is coming from TBL department table. So now this update statement is affecting multiple base tables. Okay, because of which when we execute this update statement, we get an error. Stating view or function view employee details is not updatable because the modification affects multiple base tables. Let's look at that in an action. So we have these two tables. So first go to the SQL Server Management Studio. Look at that. So we have these two tables. TBL employee and TBL department. Let's create a view on them. Let's create a view on them. So create view. View name as select the required column. Select the required column. ID name, gender, department name from TBL employee table. Joining that with the TBL department table. On the department ID. On the department ID column, which is common between TBL employee and TBL department. TBL employee and TBL department. Department ID column is common between TBL employee and TBL department. We have learned about views, and joins in the previous session. So please check those sessions if you are new to views and joins. So let's create this view. So commands completed successfully. Refresh the view folder and we should see view there. Refresh the view folder and we should see our view there. Okay. Now just to make sure we have the data as expected in the view, select star from view should return us the data back. Select start from the view should return us the data back. Which is fine. All right. Now let's try to issue that update statement. So if you look at this update statement, we are updating this view. We are updating this view. We are changing the name column and department name. Department name column where ID is equal to 1. So for the first record, we are changing the name from John to Johnny and department name from HR to IT. But then if you look at this update statement is affecting two base table. This update statement is affecting two base tables, TBL employee and TBL department. So we should get an error. So execute it. So we should get an error. View or function view employee details is not updatable because the modification affects multiple base tables. Okay, so this is expected. Now to overcome this, we can actually create an instead of update trigger because this is an update statement. So on this view, we can create an instead of update trigger and it's work. But then before we do that, let's look at another example. Let's look at another example. So we have exactly the same two tables. Same two tables, TBL department and TBL employee, same view. This is the TBL department table, this is the TBL employee table, and this is the view. Now the only difference here is the update statement. Now the only difference here is the update statement. So if you look at the update statement here, we are updating the view and we are only changing one column, that is department name column, and we know that department name column is coming from TBL department table. That is the TBL department table. So this update statement is affecting only one base table. So it should succeed. Okay, but then when you are actually execute this update statement, it updates the department name. It updates the department name in TBL department table. So here you are saying update the department name to IT, where ID is equal to 1. So you are asking change the set the department name to IT, where ID is equal to 1. So now joint department is currently HR. So now I mean to say, so now John department currently, John department name is currently HR. Okay, so now John department name is currently HR. So now it is going to change this HR to IT. And that will be done in TBL department table. And that will be done in TBL department table. Here it is. So as a result of that update, what is going to happen? John, number 3. John, number 3. This HR will become IT. So as shown here. So as shown here. So number 3. John is number 3. John is number 3. So that will be shown as IT. But look at this ban. Is also number 3. He will also be shown as if he belongs to IT department. Now when we issue this update statement, what is our intention? Our intention is basically to change John department ID from 3 to 1. Our intention is to change John department ID from 3 to 1. Because one is IT. Because one is IT. Because one is IT department. We don't want to actually change the label here. We don't want to change label here. If you change the label here, if you change the label here, whoever has the department ID, whoever has the department ID of 3, everybody will be shown as IT department, and that is wrong, and we want to avoid the situation like this. So if you update a view, if you update a view that is based on multiple tables, there are two things that can happen. If your update statement affects multiple base table, then an error will be thrown and the statement will be terminated. But whereas if your update statement affects only one table, if you just update name and gender, it may work correctly. But if you update the department name, then it may incorrectly update. The update might happen, in a wrong way. And to overcome that, we can make use of instead of update trigger. So let's now see how to create an instead of update trigger to correct this situation. Okay, so let's try to execute this query and see if it is actually wrongly updates. So when we select the data, now it is showing correctly John belongs to HR. It is correctly showing John belongs to HR. Ben also belongs to HR department. Now let's execute this update statement. So we are updating employee details. So we are updating employee details. We are asking to change the department name. To IT for record with ID is equal to 1. Meaning change John department name to IT. When we execute that query, press F5. One row is affected, which means the update is succeeded. But then when we actually select the data back from the view, look at that, John belongs to IT. So select the data from the view. Look at that, John belongs to IT. Ben also belong to IT, which is wrong. And we did not expect this to happen. If you investigate the reason why it happens, so look at this. So look at this. In the department table, the label is changed from HR to IT. From HR to IT. Ben's department is IT. I mean number 3. So it shows Ben also as IT. In fact, we should have actually changed the department ID of John from 3 to 1. Okay, which we can achieve using an instead of update trigger. Now before we write the trigger, let's change this label back to HR. So that we have correct data to work with. So update TBL department update TBL department, set department name is equal to HR, where department ID is equal to 3. So let's execute this query. One row affected. And let's select the data from the tables just to make sure it is as expected. So everything is correct now. IT, payroll, HR, admin. IT, payroll, HR, admin. Now let's go ahead and create that view. Now this view, if you look at it, it is very big. If you look at it, it is very big, but then it is very simple to understand. It is just that a bit of copy pasted code. If you understand, one section is pretty much similar. Okay. So we know that triggers make use of two special tables. So we know that triggers make use of two special tables called inserted and deleted, and we have spoken about them in the previous three video parts. Okay, so inserted table contains the new data that you have inserted, whereas deleted table will contain the rows that you have deleted. But whereas when you update a view or a table, inserted table will contain the updated new data, whereas deleted table will contain the old data before updation. All right, so we will make use of those tables. So obviously when somebody issues a statement like this, update update TBL department, set department name is equal to HR, where department ID is equal to 3. Then we have this inserted table. Inserted table and deleted table, which will have old and new values, which we should be, taking the new values and updating either, the TBL employee table in the correct way. Okay. So, and to do that, we are making use of this trigger. So we are creating a trigger. So we are creating a trigger. Create trigger name on this view, trigger name on this view instead of update. So this trigger gets fired instead of the actual update statement. Okay. So what we are doing here is there is a function called update function. There is a update function. So when somebody issued this update statement, update statement, so when somebody says, okay, update TBL department, set department name, then update of ID, this update statement, is actually updating department name column, not ID column. So this function will return false. So this function will return false, and we would not get into this, block, and we would not get into this block. But whereas if you check it, if you look at this condition, if you look at this condition, it is actually checking update department name. So it gets into this block. So it gets into this block. Okay. So basically you can use this update function. So basically you can use this update function to determine if the user is actually updating that column. So if you look at the view has got ID. View has got ID, name, gender, and department name columns. So we have to check if each column has been changed. And to do that, you can actually make use of this update function. So this function checks if the column has been changed by the update statement. So whatever is there in the next two set, the column list, that for those columns the update function will return true. So you need to check, okay, if ID column has been updated, the employee ID is updated, then we want to throw an error. Because you can't change a primary key. So we are using raise error function. So we have spoken briefly about raise error function in the previous session. If you want to throw a custom error, then you can make use of raise error function. So we are throwing an error message saying ID cannot be changed, and this is severity level and state. We will talk about these error and exception handling in a great detail in a later session. When we talk about exception handling, so when somebody is trying to change ID, so when somebody is trying to change ID, we want to raise this raise error. Then we want to raise this raise error and return from here. We don't want to process anymore. Okay, that is why we use the return. That is why we use the return keyword. Okay, and this is the AND, for this begin. Next we are checking if department name has changed. Next we are checking if department name has changed. So if department name has changed, so if somebody is issuing a query like this, so if somebody issuing a query like this, okay, department name, I mean set the department name to HR, meaning we are intending to change the department name. Okay, so if the department name is changed, then our intention is basically update the department ID column. Department ID column. Not to change the department name. Department name column in TBL department table. So to do that, obviously you will have to get the department ID that is associated with this department name, that is associated with this department name. And to do that, with this department name, you can actually join the newly entered department name with TBL department table. With TBL department table. With TBL department, with TBL department table. And where will the newly, this updated department name will be present? And where will the newly, this updated department name will be present? It will be presented in inserted table. In inserted table. So you will have to join the inserted table with TBL department table. So you will have to join the inserted table with TBL department table. And then get the department ID. And then get the department ID. Department ID column from TBL department table. From TBL department table. So that is what we are essentially doing here. So that is what we are essentially doing here. So we have this variable department ID. So we have this variable department ID which stores the department ID, which store the department ID from TBL department table, joined with inserted table, join with inserted table, and obviously here you will join on the, you will have to join on the department name column because you are setting here to a new department. Okay, so because here, because you are setting here to a new department. Okay, so for the HR department, it looks up in the TBL department table where whatever is the ID, it returns that into this variable. And then you need to check, okay, is there a department ID? Is there a department ID? If department ID is null, then it means the user has typed in some garbage. So obviously if I type in a garbage like this, obviously there is no entry. Obviously there is no entry, no department with that name. There is no entry, no department with that name. So I don't get any department ID back. So this will be null. If that is null, then we want to throw an error. Saying that invalid department name. And then return. Return back. You don't want to process anymore. Okay. Otherwise, if you get the valid department ID, otherwise, if you get the valid department ID back, then what you do, you update the TBL employee table. You update the TBL employee table. Set department ID is equal to department ID. Is equal to at department ID. At department ID. Obviously, you will have to join that with inserted table, because in the inserted table you have the employee ID, so you want to be updating the correct employee. That's it. So if department name is changed, that is how you update that. On the other hand, if they are changing the gender, if they are changing the gender, it is going to be a straightforward. All you have to do is join inserted table with TBL employee. Join inserted table with TBL employee and use the gender column in inserted table. And use the gender column in the inserted table. To set that as the value for the gender column in TBL employee table. Which is again very straightforward. And along the same line for the name, name column, use the name column from the inserted table. Join TBL employee with inserted on the ID column. That's it. So if you look at this, it is actually pretty simple. There are only two things to keep in mind. If user tries to update the ID column, if the user tries to update the ID column, we want to throw an error. If they try to update the department name, then you will have to get the department ID. From TBL department table. By joining the inserted table, with TBL department table, and obviously there are chances within update statement, and obviously there are chances within update statement within an update statement user can typing a department name that does not exist in TBL department table. If that is the case, if that is the case, you have to throw an error saying that invalid department name. And to do that, you will have to check if the department ID is null. And to do that, you will have to check if the department ID is null. It will be null only when the department name does not match what the user has specified. What the user has specified. Okay, other than that, it is pretty simple. You need to understand joins to understand this update. This update statement involves joins. Okay. So let's create this trigger on this table. So let's create this trigger on this table. Press F5. Command completed successfully. Now let's try to update this and see what happens. Okay, so first I am trying to pass in a garbage department. So first I am trying to pass in a garbage department. So what should happen? It should throw an error back. So we created this trigger. It's actually saying one row is affected. It's actually saying one row affected, which is wrong. Let's investigate why is this happening. Did we create this? Oh, okay. We are actually updating TBL department table. We should actually be updating the view. We should actually updating the view. So let's select the TBL department. So let's select TBL department. So let's select TBL department. So that is the wrong statement. That we have executed. So 3. So 3. So 3. We want that to be HR. So we want that to be HR. So let's change it back. So let's change it back. Okay. So let's change it back. So now let's try to update the view. So we are trying to set the department name to IT. So we are trying to set the department name to IT for record with ID. So we are trying to set the department name to IT for record with ID is equal to 1. For record with ID is equal to 1 in the view. And if you look at the data in the view, 1 is John. And if you look at the data in the view, 1 is John. So for John, we are trying to change his department name from HR to IT. So let's try to do that. And before we actually change it to IT, let's type in some garbage there. Let's type in some garbage there. So this department name, so this department with this department name does not exist in TBL department table. So we should be getting an error. So let's press F5. So let's press F5. Look at this invalid department name. But on the other hand, if you supply the right department, so we want to change it to IT. So we want to change it to IT. I press F5. I press F5. One row affected. So when you select the data from the view, look at this, only John's department is changed. So when you select the data from the view, look at that. Look at this, only John's department is changed to IT, but Ben is still HR. But Ben is still HR department. And to check if it has updated correctly, if it has changed the department ID column value, select the data from TBL employee and TBL department table. Look at that, John's department ID has been changed from 3 to 1. From 3 to 1. Correctly, as expected. Alright. Now let's try to change more than one column. Okay. So here I am trying to, let's select the data from the view. Let's select the data from the view. So let's try to change name, department name, and let's also try to change his gender. So let's try to change name, department name, and let's also try to change his gender. Okay, so we have this query here. So we have this query here. So we are trying to update this view. So we have this query here. So we are trying to update this view. Change the name from John to Johnny. Gender from male to female. And department name from IT to payroll. IT to payroll. Change department name from IT to let's say payroll. Okay. Let's update this and see if this query, before we implemented instead of update trigger, we used to get an error stating that the view is not updatable because the modification affects multiple base tables. But now look at that, it succeed. So let's execute it. Before before we implemented instead of update trigger, we used to get an error stating that the view is not updatable because the modification affects multiple base tables. But now look at that, it succeeds. So let's press F5. Now let's try to select the data from the view and see if it has succeeded. Now let's select the data from view. Where is the view data? Here it is. Now select the data from view and see if it has succeeded. Press F5. John to Johnny. Gender male to female. And department name IT from IT to payroll. And if you look at the underlying data, the base tables are correctly updated. And if you look at the underlying data, the data the base tables are correctly updated. So department ID for Johnny is 2. For Johnny is 2. 2 is nothing but payroll. 2 is nothing but payroll. Okay, so instead of trigger can help to update views correctly. Okay, so instead of trigger can help to update views correctly if it is based on multiple base tables. But then keep in mind, we are using update function here. This update function this update function this will return true. This update function will return true if a column is specified in the set clause. If a column is specified in a set clause. Okay. Now, irrespective, even if you set the update to the same value, let's say, for example, let's look at this with an example. So if you look at this, the name, so if you look at this, the name, So you look at this. If the name, for record with ID is equal to 1, for record with ID is equal to 1 is Johnny. So if you look at this, the name, for record with ID is equal to 1 is Johnny, and his gender is female. The record's gender is female. So now let's say we are changing Johnny's name, or let's say I am changing, or let's change name to Johnny. Name to Johnny. Set name, not this one. I made a mistake here. Name to Johnny. So it is exactly the same thing. I am setting the name to Johnny, which means you are literally not changing anything. You are literally not changing anything. But then when you update this query, execute this query, when you update this query, but then when you update this query, you are actually trying to change the name here, but it is the same value. But in your trigger, this function update, this function update of name, will actually returns a true. Even if you are not actually changing to a different value, changing it to the same value. But still the update function will return true. But still the update function will return true. Okay, just to prove that, because we will not have any data modified, let's say print name. Let's say print named changed. Let's alter this function. Okay, let's alter this function. Okay, press F5. So need to go up, change it to alter. Press F5. Command completed successfully. So if we try to execute this, it will print that message, name changed. So if we try to execute this, it will print that message. Press F5, name changed. You can see here. Which means the update function will return true even if you set the column to the same value. Okay, so that's it. That is why I personally prefer comparing the value manually from between inserted and deleted tables rather than using the update function. Okay, but again, this query does not make any sense. But again, this query doesn't really make any sense. Nobody will issue a query like this. So it is up to you whether you want to use an update function or you want to manually compare the column values between inserted and deleted tables. That's it for today. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.